Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Rosh Hashanah. We are up to Perek Gimel Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen, and Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim, V'Refuah Shlema B'Cha Bat Esther, and Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, B'Toch Shar Chulei Israel. Having taught that the successful performance of a mitzvah can depend upon a person's intent, the Mishnah discusses two historic events in which the correct intent was crucial. The Mishnah begins, V'aya ka'asher yarim Moshe yado v'gavar Yisrael v'gomer. The Torah states regarding the battle of the Jewish people against Amalek, and it was when Moshe raised his hand that Israel was stronger, and when he lowered his hand, Amalek was stronger. This is brought down in Sefer Shemot, chapter 17, Pasuk 11. During the battle, Moshe raised his hands toward heaven in prayer. As long as his hands were raised, the Jews prevailed. But when he lowered them, Amalek prevailed. So the Mishnah asks, V'chi yadav she Moshe osod milchama o shovrot milchama. Did the position of Moshe's hands make or break the success in battle? Certainly not. Elo lomar lach, rather the verse means to tell you that kol zman shayu Yisrael mistaklim klape mala, as long as Israel were looking upward, umshabedin et libam lavim shebashamayim, and subjugating their hearts to the service of their Father in heaven, hayu mitgabrim, they prevailed. Vim lav hayu noflin, but when they did not do so, they fell. Moshe raised his hands to signal to the people that they should all pray together. Therefore, specifically at those times, in response to Israel's prayer, God strengthened them and helped them to prevail over the enemy. Now, the Mishnah explains another verse in a similar way. Toward the end of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, Jews complained against God and Moshe for taking them out of Egypt and giving them only manna to eat. After God sent snakes to attack them, they admitted their sin and asked Moshe to pray on their behalf. The Mishnah discusses God's response. Kayotze badavar ata omer, you can say something similar about this verse. Aseh lecha saraf v'sim oto al nes v'ya kol hanashuch v'ra oto v'chai. God said to Moshe, make for yourself a fiery snake and place it on a pole, and it will be that all who are bitten will look at it and live. This is what Torah writes in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 21, Pasuk 8. The Mishnah asks, V'chi nachash memit o nachash mechayeh. Does looking at a snake cause death or life? Certainly not. Ela bisman she'Yisrael mistaklin klape mala. Rather, the verse teaches that as long as Israel were looking upward, umshabedin et libam lavin shebashamayim, and subjugating their hearts to the service of their Father in heaven, hayu mitrapeim, they were healed. V'im lav hayu nimokim, but when they did not do so, they withered away. The snake served as a signal to the Jews to pray together. Only when they focused their attention on the snake and heeded its message were they healed. The Mishnah now returns to halachic matters. It is clear from the previous Mishnah that when one person blows a shofar, others can fulfill the mitzvah by listening to his blowing as long as they had the necessary intent. Therefore, we see that it is possible for one person to do a mitzvah on behalf of others. However, not everyone is capable of doing so. The Mishnah writes, cheresh, a deaf person. Now, this term cheresh usually refers to a deaf mute. However, in the context of blowing the shofar and reading the Megillah, it includes one who is merely deaf, meaning he can speak but cannot hear. Since these mitzvot depend on one's ability to hear, a deaf person is not obligated to observe them. So, cheresh, a deaf person, shoteh, a deranged person. Now, a person is defined as deranged if he acts in an insane manner, he destroys valuable objects that are given to him, as the Gemara describes in Masechet Chagigah, page 3b. Such a person is not obligated to perform mitzvot because he is not responsible for his actions. The katan, and a minor, a boy under the age of 13, bar mitzvah, who is not obligated to do mitzvot, is considered a minor. And motziin et harabim midei chovatan, they cannot cause the public to fulfill their obligation. Since these people are not obligated to do mitzvot, their performance of a mitzvah is not effective for others. Zeh haklal, this is the rule. Kol she'eno mechuyav badavar eno motzi et harabim midei chovatan. Whoever is not obligated to do a mitzvah cannot cause the public to fulfill their obligation to do that mitzvah. Now, this rule refers to one who is never obligated to perform the mitzvah in question, such as a minor. one who was obligated but had already performed the mitzvah can still cause others to fulfill it by performing it on their behalf. This is because he is considered obligated due to the principle of Kol Yisrael Arivim Zelazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another, meaning every Jew is required to enable other Jews to fulfill their mitzvah obligations. Therefore, even if one Jew has already performed a certain mitzvah but another is not, the first is viewed as though he is still obligated to do the mitzvah. Now, it is important to note that some mitzvot cannot be performed by one person for another under any circumstances. These are the mitzvot that must be done with one's body. Mitzvot should be gufo, for example, wearing tefillin or dwelling in a sukkah. Since the Torah requires that tefillin be on one's head and arm and that one's body be inside the sukkah, each Jew must do these mitzvot with his own body and cannot rely on another Jew's performance of the mitzvah. And that is the end of Perek Gimel, Mishnah Chet. We continue now with Perek Daled, Mishnah Aleph. The Mishnah discusses how the mitzvah of shofar is performed when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat. The Mishnah begins, Yom Tov shel Rosh Hashanah shechal liot b'Shabbat. When the Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat, B'mikdash hayu tokim aval lo b'medina. They would blow the shofar in the temple, but not in the provinces, anywhere outside the temple. Now here the term Medina includes Jerusalem. So again, the Mishnah says they would blow the shofar in the temple, but not in the provinces, anywhere outside the temple. Although the sages forbade blowing the shofar on Shabbat because they were concerned that someone might carry it in a public domain, which is biblically prohibited on Shabbat, they did not apply this ban in the temple. Rabbinic prohibitions intended to prevent biblical desecration of Shabbat generally did not apply in the temple. This is because the Kohanim in the temple were careful and could be relied upon to avoid desecrating Shabbat, even inadvertently. Mishechra Bet Mikdash, however, once the temple was destroyed and the shofar cannot be blown even there, Hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai shiyu tokin b'chol makom sheyesh bo bedin. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai decreed that they should blow the shofar wherever there is a court. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai sought to prevent a situation where the shofar would not be blown anywhere on Shabbat, since it serves the vital role of presenting the Jewish people in a positive light before our Father in heaven on the day of judgment. He ruled, therefore, that when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, the shofar should be blown before any court. Now, to avoid desecration of Shabbat, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai required that the shofar be blown in the presence of a court whose judges would warn the people not to carry the shofar in the street, as the Rambam writes in Ilchot Shofar, chapter 2, Halakha 9. Now, the Mishnah reports a different version of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's decree. Amar Rabbi Elazar said, Lo itkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai ela b'Yavne bilvad. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai issued a decree only for Yavne, where in his time the great Sanhedrin of 71 sages was located. He allowed the shofar to be blown only before the great Sanhedrin and not before any other type of court. Now, although Rabbi Elazar mentions only Yavne, the shofar may be blown before the great Sanhedrin wherever it is located. Yavne is named because it was the place of the great Sanhedrin in the time of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Elazar's point is that the great Sanhedrin is required and not a minor Sanhedrin of 23 judges, and certainly not a court of 3 judges. But other Tanaim disagree with Rabbi Elazar. Amrulo, they said to him, Echad Yavne v'echad kol makom sheyesh bo bet din. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai made the decree both for Yavne and for any place where there is a court. Although the sages seem to be making the same point as the first Tana, the Mishnah cites both views separately, because they disagree in that the first Tana allows a shofar to be blown even before temporary court, the Rav says, while the sages require a permanent court. And the Rav does tell us, V'alacha ka'amrulo, the Alayev follows these Tanaim that disagreed with Rabbi Elazar and said that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai made the decree both for Yavne and for any place where there is a court. And that is then Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.